Hi guys, it's Hakeem, Bryce, and Jaden here. Today we're going to talk about a special what if about the U.S.'s involvement in World War II and how it was affected by Pearl Harbor.
So the specific topic is what if Japan never bombed Pearl Harbor? And the first significant thing that needs to be looked at is that inevitably the U.S. still would have joined World War II. That's a continuity that still would have existed. External factors still would have pulled them in regardless of that act of aggression from Japan. And they already gave aid, or the U.S. already gave aid to the Allied powers before joining the war effort, and that can be seen with the Lend-Lease Act. The U.S. supplied food, oil, and other war materials to the UK, Soviet Union, France, China, and other allied nations. So while they weren't necessarily directly in the war fighting against the Axis powers, they didn't show complete neutrality, and that could be seen as an act of aggression. I feel eventually they would have been pulled in just because that they weren't entirely neutral.
So I think the second big thing to talk about with this change of Japan not bombing Pearl Harbor would we still nuke Japan? And I don't think we would have nuked Japan. I think that would be a big change in history. With no direct attack from Japan, there would be no reason for us as the US being a big power in the world to nuke them. There would just be no reason for it. And the effect of us not nuking Japan would be that no one would really know the true power of nuclear weapons on a big urban area, nor would the long-term effects of nuclear weapons on humans, wildlife, just basically anywhere you want to live. We wouldn't know what that's like since they've only been tested in oceans previously. And then additionally, I think later on after World War II in the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis would have been amplified because of no one using nuclear weapons, and there could have possibly been a nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis without all of these movements to stop nuclear weapons from being used in war.
And along with also what you previously said, I mean, it's known that Nazi Germany was also trying to split the atom and get an atomic bomb. So it's interesting to think about what would have happened if, because U.S., like you said, Bryce, the U.S. wouldn't have had incentive to nuke them, and they might have not had the same incentive to use technology or use their resources to create one. So it's interesting to think about what could have happened historically, because what if the Nazis had it first? They would have the monopoly on it, and no one knows what the world would look like currently.
All right, so a second notable change that would have occurred from Japan never bombing Pearl Harbor is the internment of Japanese Americans. It wouldn't necessarily be as huge as it was. So first off, we should obviously establish that there would still be a stigma towards Japanese Americans, but the internment specifically wouldn't exist.
Well, the internment happened because
the internment happened because of Pearl Harbor. So without Pearl Harbor, the internment of Japanese Americans wouldn't exist and be on such a global scale. So yeah, as we just stated, because of Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt signed off on Executive Order 9066, which created multiple internment camps within California, Oregon, and Washington, all three states which have extremely high Japanese American populations. The reason as to why it was made in the first place was fear of an onshore attack by the Japanese.
With spies and all that.
Yeah, with spies and all that. But a large majority of the population that was put into these internment camps were American. Like, they were Japanese, yes, but they were also American. I also believe that a significant change that would have happened is, like, Japanese American populations in all three states that we mentioned wouldn't necessarily be as high as it is today. Although they were high before in California, Washington, and Oregon, more like the Japanese American population across America would be far more like dispersed across the entire country. And um, essentially what was caused or what preceded after the migration of Japanese Americans is like several cardiovascular and like post-traumatic
Post-traumatic stress.
post-traumatic stress that occurred after it, which like led after generations of like trauma that exists still today within Japanese Americans.
And that could also change the government's scale in the future years, because that kind of kickstarted the idea of the government, like of people viewing the government.
Haven't we seen reparations for Japanese?
There's been
intervention?
talks about it. I don't think we actually have.
There
There's
have been
talks.
talks about
Yeah.
reparations.
But I was thinking more of the idea of like how people viewed the government as having too much power. And like maybe if that never happened, maybe the views during the Vietnam War and things like that wouldn't have been as prevalent and they wouldn't have existed. Because I
Yeah.
feel like it all kickstarted there for the most part. Finally, you also need to look at the societal changes that would have happened, and the cultures of both the U.S. and Japan would be very different. And in my view, specifically for Japanese culture, baseball, like being the national sport, like it probably wouldn't be like that. Baseball was introduced in Japan in the late 1800s due to U.S. Intervention. And it became the national sport in the early years after World War II, and that was also due to military intervention and societal intervention. So it's kind of interesting to think about like how that could have happened, or it's interesting to look at how that happened, and that happened because of that. And maybe if Japan didn't bomb Pearl Harbor, then there wouldn't be as much of a U.S. presence within Japan during World War II, but also after World War II, and societal changes would be different. I think there's something similar that could be said about U.S. culture as well.
Yeah, so essentially, like anime has, or like for example, anime has had like a humongous like impact on American culture. You often see anime that's televised in America have like characters be playing American sports like baseball and
Basketball,
yeah,
everything.
like basketball, baseball,
Skateboarding.
yeah, skateboarding,
Everything.
to like largely American like played sports and activities. And there's also like a large community based in America, like about anime. Like America has a very like diverse and huge community concerning that, and it without its introduction into the States, or like the cultural exchange, essentially wouldn't necessarily be as huge.
Not even just anime, just like animation movies and
Yeah.
shows in general. I mean, how different could all that be?
Yeah, like Japanese artists have greatly influenced like American cartoons throughout
Right.
the years.
Like
And-
Disney, Pixar, stuff
And
like
then another thing with sports like baseball is skateboarding. Skateboarding was always a very American sport, if you want to call it a sport. It was always an American activity, and now the best skaters in the world come from Japan. It's even introduced to the Olympics now because of how the U.S. has spread out that culture, but Japan is the main place where it got spread. They have the best skateboarders in the world now, and it's really the U.S.'s only competition in the sport, because just like with baseball, because of the U.S.'s intervention. It's also important to note that
Well, can I interrupt you for a second? And also to go back to that idea with baseball, I mean, connected back to baseball, I mean, the World Baseball Classic this year, Japan beat the United States, so
Yeah.
it also shows that same idea.
yeah, the Japanese athletes constantly get first, second place in the Olympics, even other skating events. And I think kind of the last point that we're gonna note would be that we still see U.S. intervention in Japan. We still have troops stationed there. We still have limits on how much of their economy can go towards the military because of the U.S. involvement in Japan. So it's important to note the long-term effects that potentially, if Japan didn't bomb Pearl Harbor, these long-term effects that could have happened without that intervention from them in the war.
Japan was imperial at that time, so like, who's to say that they wouldn't be a global, like a real global superpower? Who says they could be up there with the United States and Russia and China and all that in the current day. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty much it.
that's it.
Thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Have a blessed day. Have a phenomenal day.